What's up everyone, welcome back to Blending Graphics for another Photoshop tutorial. I first and foremost want to apologize for my absence. I have been gone for a little bit of time, and that is just because school is starting to get pretty busy, so I have not been able to produce as many videos as I would like, and it might continue this way for a while, so I will apologize for that. But nonetheless, I do have a fun video for you all today, and it's going to be all about Medusa. I always thought this was such a cool character and a composition that I've been wanting to do for quite some time now, so I'm very happy to share this with you. It is going to be a bit on the longer side, so go ahead and grab something to eat and drink, get yourself comfortable as we dive right on in, and let's get started. Alrighty, so just like the majority of my projects, we're working with a 5000 by 4000 pixel size canvas, and we're going to turn on our main subject here, who is going to be Medusa. So we're hitting Command T to scale her up quite a bit. We want to make sure that we fill the majority of this canvas at least. So let's just kind of get this situated here. So something right about here looks good. And immediately we're going to go right into the pen tool, and we just want to extract her from the background. Now, the hand that's on the left there that's holding the clock, we're not going to use that. I do have another picture that we're going to use instead. I just don't like the way she's holding the clock, and yeah, so we're just going to get rid of that. We're not going to use that part. So let's just go ahead and come all the way down here. We'll complete this, and then we're going to right click, make a selection, and then we can go ahead and add a layer mask so that way we separate her from the background. And then this is the other picture I found, same model. But for this, I just like the hand on this one a little bit better. So I'm just turning down the opacity, and I'm just looking at the head right now, so that way we can pretty much get the same scale and make sure that we match that same size. So might need to scale this up just a little bit more. Okay, so that looks good. We can turn up the opacity. Same thing. We're just gonna go right back to that pen tool, and for this, we're only going to extract the hand. I don't care about the rest of the model for this one, just the hand. Alright, so let's go ahead and complete that. Same thing, we'll add a layer mask to that. And then what we want to do is just bring this right above our arm here. And just, obviously I'm kind of matching up the wrists. Alright, so let's turn the opacity back up on that, and we're going to go right into the layer mask here and just clean some of it up a little bit. So on the bottom layer, we're just going to paint black on that so we can just get rid of this part of the hand on that original image. So let's erase that. And then obviously now we need to clean up this hand that's on top. So we're just going to erase this part here. I'm using a hard edge brush right now. We'll go ahead and feather this in just a little bit in a second here, but I just want to make sure that we are kind of fitting in with the original arm. Alright, very nice. So now this is where I'm going to switch brushes, and we can just go ahead and soften this up so that way the blending is much better and it's very cohesive on here. So let's just go ahead and clean this up. Something like this should do the trick. And there we go. We've got a new hand. Alright, so let's just go ahead and continue on from here. Alright, so the next thing that we're actually going to do is I'm going to drop in a temporary backdrop here and a background. I'm going to change this up later on in the video, but this is just going to kind of give us a bit of a placeholder for the meantime, so that way we don't have just that blue background. Kind of sets the mood a little bit for us. And now we can go ahead and start that process of applying the tons and tons of snakes on Medusa's head here. And you're not going to see me do this step by step for every second of creating this, but I'm going to kind of skip and jump around here, and you're at least going to get a sense of my process and now how I applied this effect onto Medusa. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is I did leave the hair on Medusa's head on purpose, just to help me kind of give me a sense of, not scale, but just to kind of help give me of how I want to apply the snakes on there, of how high I want to go essentially. And finding the snakes, this took hours to do. When I was looking for the snakes, I wanted to find the same species, the same color, because I knew that was going to save me a ton of time in the end. So that in and of itself, like I said, just took hours to do. And as you can see right now, it is just one giant masking game, just going from one snake to the other, painting on different layer masks, because you want to have that coiled effect. Now, I did do this a couple of times. The very first time that I did this, I didn't quite like the look that I had. I had a lot of just snake heads, and it just didn't really look really nice. So I wanted to add maybe more bodies and not so much the head, just to kind of give you that overlapping effect and try to create a bit of variety. I didn't want it to look the same. I'm using a lot of the same snakes, so that was the challenge in and of itself, because you want to create some variety. You don't want it to look the same. All right. So we're just going to continue here, and really it is just all about masking. It's just trying to find out what you think is going to be the best look for this in terms of what parts of the body you want to be on top, what parts of the body you kind of want to be on the bottom. The other thing here too, and you can see, is I'm applying these snakes at the bottom of the head. When I was looking for the images, I looked for a couple of different angles. You know, you don't want to just have the same view just straight on. You wanted to find some where the snake is, you know, the camera's pointed underneath or on top, just to help us out here and give us some variety when we're applying this. The other thing that I wanted to do and incorporate is just right around the forehead there. I wanted to have the bodies of the snake and those coils to kind of mimic hair curls. And so that was a big priority for me, and I do like the look that this came out. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to finish this up here. I only have a little bit more to go, just in terms of the head, and then we're going to move on to the snake that's going to be on the wrist. So just a couple more seconds here, and then I will show you the part that I did for the wrist. Okay, so we're moving on here. I did find a good head to use for the wrist here, and this body in particular I'm going to use for the curls and wrapping around. I like the way that it kind of easily wraps around naturally, so I thought this was just a good fit to use for the arm. What I do have to do though a couple times is just kind of command click on our Medusa here, just so that way we can just load in a selection and make sure that I'm only erasing inside here. So let's just clean this up nicely here, and then I'm gonna have just wrap this around there, so it looks like the tail of the snake is starting to wrap around the arm there. So we're just manually painting black on that layer mask to give off that effect. And then we're going to use this same body once more, lower down on the arm, to just continue that coil process. I just wanted to have the look of the snake just wrapping around. We're obviously going to apply some shadows to make it look like it's a bit more realistic, but for the meantime, we're just continuing up here. So let's just go ahead and rotate this a bit down here. I'm going to have this finish here. This is going to be the tail of the snake. So I'm just kind of zooming in and out to see how I like this. We can squish this down just a little bit like so. Alright, so somewhere right about here. And same thing, let's just go ahead and just kind of erase this part here, just so that it looks like it's naturally curling around that arm, and we can kind of erase some of this part here. I'm going to go ahead and use the liquify tool just so we can kind of compress at least the scales of the skin here and make that look a little bit more realistic. So I've cleaned that up, but let's go ahead and turn this into a smart object so I can always make changes if I want to, but we're gonna go right into the liquify tool. Let's zoom in on this tail of the snake here, and we're just gonna go ahead and just press this in just a little bit so that way it starts to, again, just kind of shrink towards the tail. I'm just kind of going slow and steady here, just to make it look as seamless as possible and look as realistic as possible. And I think something like this is going to be the effect that we are looking for. Maybe tuck this in just a little bit higher up. But yeah, I think this is looking really good. This is, you can see that it's starting to kind of mesh that body a little bit and compress the scales of the skin. All right. So there we go. We have the snake on the arm, snakes on the head, and now we can go ahead and move on to our next step in this composition. And the next step is we need to match the same hue in all of the snakes, make it look consistent. We're going to start with the snake on the wrist first and foremost. So let's just go ahead and drop in a hue and saturation adjustment layer. We're going to clip it to just that snake on the wrist, and we can just kind of pull this hue over to the left a little bit. And I want more of that cyan color. That's the goal that I'm looking for. And once we have all of the snakes in a consistent hue, then we can make global changes. So right now I'm moving to the different snakes on the head here and try to make those look consistent as well from one to another. But I'm actually gonna go ahead and speed through this process because it is very repetitive and you don't need to see this in real time. So I'll be back with you in just a second once I'm all done with this. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's going to pretty much wrap it up with the snakes. I think they look pretty consistent in the meantime, and now we can make some further changes. What now we can do is just change up this background. I found a different backdrop to use, and I want to replace this one with that. So let's go ahead and drop in that image here. And immediately we can go ahead and start making some adjustments with this. I want to go ahead and tackle the lighting on this first. So let's just go ahead and throw in an exposure adjustment layer on top of this, and we can go ahead and darken this up a bit. So let's just come right up here. We'll add an exposure, let's clip it on there, and then let's turn this down quite a bit. Alright, so this is looking much better. We can turn this down just a bit more. We're obviously going to have to now tackle the warmth of the background. So we're adding this Hue and Saturation adjustment layer to do just that. We can desaturate this quite a bit. And while we're at it, we can even just lower the lightness a bit further on here. And now that we kind of have a good foundation, we're going to add another one of these adjustment layers right on top of it. This time we're going to put it into colorize, and I just want to shift the hue over to something kind of in between like the purple and pinkish kind of tones. I think that's what I originally have in my mind as a visual of how I want this to look. So we can just kind of play around with it, but just somewhere right about here looks pretty good. We can even play around with the saturation, but I think we're good at the most part for right here. Alright, so we're gonna collapse all of that, we're gonna turn the snakes off, and now we can start messing with the lighting on our character here. So on top of that group, we're gonna do pretty much the same thing that we just did with the background, add the exposure adjustment layer, and we can go ahead and just bring this all the way down. And once we have it at a good level here, we can press Command-I or Control-I to go ahead and just invert this mask a bit. Actually, you know what? I'll just leave this here. We're going to switch to a soft round brush, and instead of inverting the mask, let's just go ahead and paint black on this. So that way we can bring back some of the light. I envision the light source coming from the left. Well, not so much envisioning it, but just kind of working off of what our original model has and where the light is coming from. So I just want to match that. So that's why I'm painting back some of the light that will be casted here on her arms and a little bit on her face here as well. I don't want her to be complete dark because after all, she is our main subject and our main focal point, so she's got to be the star of this. So let's just bring some of this light back in. We can play around with the flow throughout here. So I'm just going to take a couple more seconds with this. Obviously, I'll continue to make adjustments throughout this process, but we just want to create a nice foundation for us going forward. And I think we're pretty much there. So yeah, let's add a levels on top of this, and just for the sake of introducing a little bit more contrast, that's what we're doing here. So I'm bringing in the shadows and the highlights and even the midtones. We can just kind of push and darken those up just a little bit. So something right about here. And once we actually have this set, we're going to move on to the snakes, and that's what we're doing now. I'm adding a Hue and Saturation adjustment layer to that group layer. This is why it was nice to get the snakes uniform in terms of hue and saturation, so that way we can just make these global adjustments. Don't get me wrong, I love the blue tones of the snake, they look beautiful, but just not quite the effect and the look that we're going for here. So I'm desaturated this and kind of darkened this up a little bit to see how that colorized looks. Don't like it so much, but we'll stick to this, maybe boost this up to more of the purplish tones. So yeah, so I think this will be a good foundation for us. And then what we can do is once we have this, we'll just Alt Option click on this effect, and then we can just group this onto the snakes in the back. And then the same thing with the snake on the arm here. We'll just same thing, make a copy of that by holding the Alt Option key and dragging that over. And now that we got the hue and the color in place, we can introduce a bit more contrast. I'm starting with the snake that's on the arm first. I've added the levels, and we're just kind of bringing the endpoints in here just to create that contrast. And that looks pretty good here. We can go ahead and move to the snakes that's actually on the head itself, and we'll just add a different levels adjustment layer, and we're just going to bring in the shadows, bring in the highlights, and that's just going to create a little bit of that contrast look that we're going for. That way we can kind of match everything with each other here. So let's just drop this down here and just apply that to the snakes in the back. And I think we're off to a good start. So next thing, we'll just continue to add more color, highlights, things like that moving forward here. We're going to start with Medusa first, and we're going to drop in this curves adjustment layer here, and let's go ahead and just pull this down a little bit so we can see the full graph. But what I'm going for is just to darken up the top of the head here and that shadow that's going to be casted by the snake. So I want to darken this up quite a bit. Control or Command I to invert that, and we're painting this back in now. Like I said, just kind of at the top here. We want to make sure that's nice and dark. For realistic purposes, obviously there's not going to be a lot of light there because of all the bodies of the snake. And we can take this a step further with an exposure adjustment layer this time. We're just doing the same effect, but just adding a different adjustment layer. But we're just decreasing this, inverting the mask, and then same thing, just painting this back. I usually like to do a couple of different adjustment layers for like highlights and shadows. And then this one we can also create the shadow being cast by the snake on the arm here. And once we actually have this shadow looking pretty good, we can move to the shadow of the snake itself. Right now we're just working on the arm, and we'll move on to the snake now here in just a moment. But this is looking pretty good. Sometimes, you know, less is more. You don't want to go too heavy with this. But let's go ahead and add an exposure adjustment layer on top of the snake. Let's decrease that lighting, and then we're just going to invert the mask and then go ahead and paint that back in. And then now we can just shape the body just a little bit more. Bear in mind where this light is coming from. It is coming from the left side, so the right side of the snake, it's going to be a little bit darker. The bottom parts of the snake is also going to be a little bit darker as well. So just kind of think about these things in reality, what parts of the snake is going to be lighter or darker, and just kind of conceptualize that as you tackle this here. Alright, so we can move down to the tail here, just kind of touch this area up. And just like what we did with Medusa, I'm going to do the same thing with our snake friend here. And that is just adding another adjustment layer on top, another exposure adjustment layer, maybe something a little bit darker, and just to really exaggerate this shadow and this contrast effect. So let's just go ahead and I'll just label this S2 here. We'll make sure that we're on the layer mask and darkening this up here just a bit more. But this is essentially what we're gonna have to do for the rest of the snakes. It's a process, it takes a lot of time, but you know what? It pays off in the end. Alright, so you're not actually gonna see me do this for the snakes on the head because this video would be like 2 hours long. So we don't have time for that. The principles are the same in what I just did with the snake on the arm. I'm gonna do the same thing with the snakes on the head. So let's just skip over that to where it's all complete and you can kind of get a sense of what we just did here. And so this is where we're left off at, and that's just adding the exposure adjustment layers and just shaping the body, kind of darkening it up a bit. Alright, so we still have quite a bit left to go, and for those that are still watching, thank you, appreciate the support. We're going to go back to Medusa here and just kind of make some adjustments here. We're just going to really tighten things up a little bit. I'm going back to that exposure adjustment layer and just kind of bringing in some of the lightness back a little bit on some parts of her. But this is where we're going to start to see these nice differences and make this look really cool. Alright, so she's looking great. I'm going to touch up just a little bit more around the face here. Excellent. So on the very top, let's go ahead and drop in a curves adjustment layer. So we're going to start playing around with her skin tone here. So on the red channel, I just want to increase this ever so slightly. Just very, very little. Just want to warm up the skin just a little bit here. And then what we can do, once we got that in place, we're going to go to our blue channel next. So let's go to that. And let's just kind of see how this looks if we just boost it up just a little bit. Let's just bring this down. We don't want to do too much because obviously you can see we have a little bit of green skin. I don't want her to look sick. So just a little bit. We'll just bring this down. maybe just more so in the highlights. But on top of all of this, we're going to add a color balance layer here, and then here on just the different midtones, highlights, and shadows, we can just kind of push a little bit more cyans, blues, and magentas a little bit here, just to kind of help make her look like she belongs in this background that we've already got a nice hue going for. So let's just match her a little bit better, and we can drop the opacity on this overall. And then we're going to add a curves adjustment layer, and this is going to help us exaggerate some of those highlights and areas on the face here. So let's just go ahead and invert this mask, bring this to the top instead. And just for the eyes, we're going to start to work on the eyes. Let's increase our flow just a bit more. And we want to be drawn into these eyes. You know, obviously that's her weapon. And the snakes obviously turn everyone into stone. So we want her eyes to pop. And we're going to introduce a little bit of a blue, or sorry, not blue, purple tone and overlay. And that's just going to kind of give it a nice little look. Again, the eyes are just kind of blending in with the colors that we're using in this piece as well. And then on top of this as well, we're gonna just exaggerate some of these points on her face. I've just using a curves layer, increase the lighting, and now we're just going different parts of the face, like around the cheeks, the nose area. Let's just exaggerate some of these bright points. Just give it a nice little pop. There's it before and after. Yeah, we're looking good, guys. Okay, I'm gonna make a couple more minor tweaks before we move on to the background. Let's just add another curves adjustment layer here. We're going to make a little bit of an S shape here. And again, just kind of exaggerating a little bit more features on the face. So just something like this, we can boost this up just a bit more. And then we're going to invert this curves mask just by Control Command I, and then just painting again some more areas just around the nose and the cheekbone areas. So take your time with this, and we're just trying to make this look really nice and sharp. Okay, but this is looking good. I want to go to touch up that area on the left ear. So we're going to go back to the exposure adjustment layers, just darken this up. It's not going to be that light, so let's darken her ear up just a bit more. And then I want to go back to our original curves layer that we had, and maybe go back to the red channel and just bump this up ever so slightly, just to kind of give it a little bit more life. Now it's time to work on the background. I've found just a nice bright pink tone to work with, and we're going to create some highlights back here. You can even change this up a little bit, maybe something a little bit more purple. You know, just experiment with the colors. We are going to put this into an overlay blend mode, and that's what it's in right now. This is just going to give me a good sense of kind of the direction I want to take this. So we'll stick with this color here, and we're going to invert this mask, and not on everything, but just on little parts here. I'm using a soft round brush. Obviously I'm speeding through this, but we're just gonna increase the highlights on some of the area here. So maybe on the tops, not so much in the very far background, but just something a little bit more closest to our character. That looks really good. And then we're gonna add another solid color on top of that. This is gonna create a little bit more atmosphere effects. We can change the color just ever so slightly here, something right about there. We'll hit OK. Invert that mask, and then we're going to switch to a cloud brush or dust brush, whatever you want to do, but let's lower the flow just a little bit on here, all the way down, basically 1%. We might increase that a little bit, but we just want to kind of create a little bit of atmosphere haze just at the bottom here. I just want to kind of create a little bit of separation with our character from the background and make her stand out just a bit more. So that's what this is going to provide us, and also a really cool effect as well. So it's, you know, killing two birds with one stone here. And just a couple of dabs right here. Alright, so that's a great adjustment. We're going to add basically the same color at the very top. And this way we can just add some of the color on top of our character, is the reason why I'm doing this here. Just at the very bottom. I don't want to cover up too much, just a little bit here. Right at the bottom. Something like that. And I think that looks really good. I'm going to add another one. We're going to switch just to a regular brush this time, but I just want to enhance the light that's coming from the left side here. So we want to exaggerate that. We want to make it obvious that the light is coming from the left here. So that's why I'm just touching this up on the left side ever so slightly. And we can switch up the colors, maybe just something a little bit darker instead, or a little bit more saturated. Something like this. Yeah, that's the look that we're going for. And now we can go ahead and start to work on our character. So we're going to start increasing the highlights, and we're going to go ahead and put this into just a regular, no blend mode, but we're going to touch up the left side first here. And the real challenge is the balance. You know, we don't want too much pink, but you don't want too little either. So it's just finding that right balance. And we're just sticking right now just on the left side. And we'll touch up the neck a little bit here. We can double click on this and just use the blend if. We'll bring back some of the dark areas underneath, so that way that necklace there doesn't look so faded. Okay. As you can kind of see here on this right arm a little bit, it is a bit dark, and I've gone back to the exposure adjustment layer to bring some of this back in. But what I'm going to have to do is actually go to our original layer, and we're going to double click on that thumbnail so we can get into the original image. We'll unlock this, convert it to a smart object, and then go to our camera raw filter. And then in here, we're just going to go to this blacks, and then we're just going to increase, or not the blacks, but the shadows, and we're going to increase that. And then what we can do, we'll hit OK, and on this layer mask, we're going to paint this back in so that way we can just bring some of this, or take away some of that really dark shadow. And then once we have that, we're going to right click, flatten the image, and save it. So that way we can get back into our original image, and then you can see just that adjustment, just to help us out a little bit. Like I said, we don't want it so dark on that arm. So immediately you can see that it helped us out a little bit, but we still may have to go back and patch some areas up. All right, we're going back to the arm now, bringing back the pink tones. Again, balance. I'm going to be kind of coming in and out of this to get a good look of this. What we don't want to happen is have her look like a giant walking Pepto-Bismol bottle. That is not the effect we're going for. So less is more. We do want to preserve a lot of this natural flesh tones. And I'm actually just going to take a few more seconds with this. We'll wrap this up. You also may have noticed that I added a long nail on her left hand. So that's going to be an effect that we're going to add on as well. I just kind of wanted to see how that would look. And I kind of like it. And I wanted to do something a little bit different than her natural fingernail. So we'll create that in a little bit as well. Alright, so we're just going to wrap this up with the highlights on the left hand, and then we can go ahead and just push forward with this. Alright, so Medusa's off to a great start. I want to make a little adjustment going back to the color balance layer, and maybe just kind of bringing it in a little bit more of the magenta tone. So let's just go ahead and do that. And you know what, I'll just add a new one on top instead of going back to the other one. Let's just again, just kind of bump up the magentas a little bit. And we can do that with the highlights as well. And yeah, I kind of like that. We can lower the opacity so it's not overbearing. But at this point, we're going to have to start working on the snakes now. And the easiest way to get this underway is to add the color balance for this on top of the group. And we're just going to do the same thing, kind of introducing more of the blues and magentas with our snakes here. And that's going to just automatically and real easily just bring in some of the color to match with our environment. And then in fact, I'm actually going to add levels on here just to increase the contrast even more than what we already had on there to begin with. So let's just bring this up here just like so. Something like that. Okay, perfect. All right, so now what we have to do is just kind of drag and drop these with copies onto our other ones. So we gotta add it onto the snakes in the back and make sure that it's clipped on there, and the same thing with this snake on the arm as well. So that way all of our snakes are cohesive and with the same color and tones in that respect. So we want to make sure that that all looks the same. And we'll just, yeah, there we go. So they look good. And now we can pretty much get to work on the highlights. I'm just using a solid color here. It's going to be in overlay blend mode, a nice bright tone. And this is just going to help with our highlights to add on here. We're going to add a few different highlights, working with a few different color adjustment layers. And we're going to start with this one. Immediately just starting to paint on the left side of these snakes here. Obviously the ones on the left side of the head are going to be the most direct in contact with that light, so they're going to be a bit more pronounced with this color. But what I'm actually going to do here is just, we're going to touch this guy up, and then I'm going to speed through this because we have a lot of snakes to get through, but still kind of want to give you an idea of what my process looks like just with one application process. Like I said, we're going to do a couple, but this will be the first one I'm going to apply to these snakes here. So I'll get through this here in a few seconds and I'll meet you at the finish line. So this is what it looks like with that first application. I'm really digging it. And like I said, we have a couple more to go. I'm not going to show you those, unfortunately. It is just going to be the same thing. We're just going to add a couple of extra solid color adjustment layers, play around with the blend modes. But let's go ahead and skip over that. And this is what that outcome looks like after those next couple of applications. And I think these snakes are looking awesome. I'm really liking how this is turning out. All right, friends, only a couple of things left with this. Thank you for those that are still watching this. Let's continue here for the final elements. We're going to go back to our character, and what I'm doing now is just a regular solid color adjustment layer, pretty much sticking to that same pink. It's not in any blend mode, but we're just going to introduce a little bit of light to bleed onto this dress here. So just kind of painting a little bit over it. Might need to go back, and on a new layer behind it, we're just introducing some light that's going to be bouncing off the backside, a little glow effect. And then with this layer, it's just another solid color adjustment layer in overlay blend mode that we can just add on some more lighting effects onto the dress and have it just blend a little bit better than just a normal blend mode. So we're going to take a couple more seconds with this dress. We're going to do the same thing with adding the light behind our character as well. And as I'm doing this, I'm starting to see that's a little bit too light for my preference. So in just a second here, we're going to take care of that to just darken it up a little bit so she doesn't look like she has a halo around her entire body. All right, just a little bit more. Perfect. We're adding a Hue and Saturation adjustment layer and clipping it to that background light. And we're just going to take this lightness slider just right here and let's just drag it to the left and darken it up. So again, it doesn't have a very strong halo effect. That's not what we're going for. Let's go back to that. With the opacity up, we can drop this even more. Perfect. Okay, so now is where we're going to do the application process for the nails. I'm just using a pen tool to do this to just kind of create what I envision as just a little bit longer nails. And I just added a nice dark purplish black color to apply to this. So that's what we're going to do. And let's just see how that looks with all of them here. Let's just skip over that so you're not seeing me do every single nail because it is quite a repetitive process. And here we are. So it's just a nice little effect just to kind of go away from the normal looking nails that she had, just to try to fit the character a little bit better. But now with these newly applied nails and her fresh manicure, we're gonna add a little bit of highlight onto these nails just to, again, have that light interaction with our scenery here. So let's just apply this to the nails real quick. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we are gonna be good to jump into the camera raw filter. So here's our rough draft before jumping into this wonderful application here. So we're gonna do some final adjustments and call it a day. So we're gonna start with this contrast, bump it up even more. You know me, I love the contrast. Let's take the blacks and let's bring those down just a little bit. And we can come down to the saturation and bump this up too much. We don't wanna go heavy with that. And then just on the color mixer here, we can go to our magentas, and for the luminance, just increase the magentas on that. Awesome, we're gonna go to the color grading here. Sometimes I really just like to just move these around and just hope that maybe something catches my eye. But I think for this, I primarily just wanna stick to like the magenta tones. I kinda like the idea also of maybe having like a blue highlight tint. So that's what I'm playing around with right now. And we'll just kind of stick with this for the moment. We'll go to the effects, add a little bit of grain here. And let's hit OK, and this is going to be the final image of what we have. Yeah, it turned out really great, guys. I hope you liked it. I've actually spent a little bit more time with this because I just wanted to do a little bit more attention to detail on some things before I kind of put this up on Instagram. And so here's the final image that I have here, just making those little adjustments before sending this off. But anyways, guys, again, thank you for those that made it all the way to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you're not doing so already. You can also check out some of my other work on Instagram as well. I do have a link in the description there that you can always check out. And hopefully it won't be too long before I bring out the next video here. Like I said early on, I know my school's getting a little bit heavy and I'm not having as much freedom to do some of these projects, but I still like doing this for you all, and I hope you enjoyed the videos as well. So for the meantime, please stay safe, everybody. I hope to see you really soon with another video here. Take it easy.